It's the things that cause us the most grief that actually elevate us to places that we never imagined we'd be. We don't want to go through any grief-related event that we've dealt with. But the reality is, grief is tantamount to growth. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you for coming back to see another episode of the Grief Empowerment Theory. I'm Jay Lewis, and I'm bringing you another episode because I want to make sure that with this show, we transform the thinking of the victim mentality, and we teach people how to use it as a fuel and a catalyst to go to the next level. And today, I have a young lady who has absolutely done that. Miss Bambi Lynn, she's an author, an award-winning author. Let me point that out. And she has an incredible story in which she's been able to navigate through her incredible journey and put it down on paper so that people can understand it and she can help as many as she possibly can. So before I go any further, I'm going to introduce Miss Bambi Lynn. Bambi, please say hello and let the audience know a little bit about you.
Well, I'm so excited to be on your show. You know, this is 2 months in the making, so it's really a privilege. I am a mother of 6 adult children. I have 13 grandchildren, and I have been on this journey of using my story to and using it to make other people be able to tell their own stories, because I believe that there are healing through stories, and the more that we're able to tell our stories, the more that we're able to lock arms with people to realize that all of us have a story.
Understand. First off, absolutely understandable.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast, and it was interesting because the comedian Kevin Hart was he was talking, and he obviously compared the journey of life to a book, and he said, "You know, we're all writing a story. How good do you want your book to be?"
Yes.
So I absolutely can concur with that. And you took it to the literal.
I did.
By writing. Do me a favor. Talk about Journeys from Josephine. That's the first book that you wrote?
That is the first book that I wrote. Yes.
Okay.
And you know, it took me a long time to write the book, only for the sole purpose that I wanted to make sure that my heart was clean. I wanted to make sure that my heart was in forgiveness. And I wanted to make sure that there was no residue, you know, of the past, but that I was writing my story so that other people could write theirs. My story is about, myself, a young little girl that received a rag doll for a Christmas present, and she was my security blanket throughout my life. She was the one that knew my secrets, my stories. She carried my tears, but she went on a journey with me, and all the broken pieces of my life, like a puzzle that's thrown on the floor and you got to put it back together again. And God used her to give me grace to be able to tell my story and to be able to tell it in a way that other people would feel confident and would feel brave and would feel courageous to be able to tell their own stories. Because I believe that that I wrote my story for the sole purpose for other people to write theirs. You know, a logo that I have now is "My Story, Your First Aid Kit." Because you don't write your story for yourself. You write your story for the people behind you. It's like you're plowing the field, you know, for them to have the courage and to have the bravery to tell their stories. My story, I realized that my story hit even crossed over cultures and demographics and different groups of people that aren't allowed to tell their stories. You remember, I'm not a young woman. I have my oldest daughter is 37, so I lived in a time that you didn't tell your stories. You didn't tell the secrets of your household. You didn't tell what was going on in your household. And especially in different demographics and different cultures, you never revealed the pain that was happening. And so when I wrote my book and I began to start sharing it, even amongst different cultures, they said, you spoke to my soul. You spoke my story that I was never allowed to tell. So now you're giving me freedom to be able to tell my story, because we all have them. Just some of us are just willing to put it on paper because God calls us to do that. It wasn't something that I thought, oh, this is such a cutesy story that I want to tell it, but I felt ordained by God to tell my story so that other people can tell theirs.
That is so interesting because, like you said earlier, so many people, due to whatever, maybe culturally, maybe whatever situation, are afraid to tell their story.
Mm-hmm.
And you said something that's very important. You said God ordained you.
Yes, absolutely.
This. Talk a little bit about your religion and your religious background and how that has helped you navigate through your journey.
Well, my relationship, my Christian relationship with Jesus started, a long time ago when I was a church bus kid, which means that there was a bus that came along our neighborhood every Sunday to pick up the kids and put them on the bus, and we would go to church. And I was one of those kids. My mother didn't go to church. My mother looked at it like most parents at that time. Oh my goodness, I get rid of my kids for 4 hours, So we went to church. But I loved Jesus, and I loved the stories, and I loved the Sunday school songs and things like that. But I never thought Jesus was for me because I wasn't a family within the church. I was just a church bus kid. I wasn't part of the family.
Right.
So I carried, Jesus part of me, and I would tell people about him, but he didn't become real to me until I was on a bridge in 1986, ready to take my life, saying I can't live this life anymore. I had gone through some trauma within my life, and I was ready to end it. And I was ready to say, God, I can't do this anymore. And when I went to jump, a police officer stopped me, threw me down to the ground, and threw me into his police car. And he took me to a psychiatric center for adults. They found out that I was only 16. So then they took me to a psychiatric center for children, did some blood work, did some testing. The next day, they called me into their office and said, did you know that you were pregnant? And I said, no, I had no idea. And they said, people like you don't have babies. And I asked them if I could spend some time in my room for a minute. And I went into my room that day. I got onto the floor and I said, if there truly is a God, you save me, save my baby, and I will honor you all the days of my life. I will serve you until the end of my life if you save me and you save my baby. And I believe at that moment, that was my cry out, to accept Christ. It was my cry out to say, God, I'm willing to live my life for you. So it wasn't this cutesy little sinner's prayer. It wasn't this, but I knew at that moment that God came into my life. And I knew at that moment that he was going to transform me and take all the pain of my past and take all of the hurt and the abuse and all the trials and the tribulations that I went through as a kid, from, being sexually abused, being trying to commit suicide. My dad was a brutal alcoholic. And I knew that God was going to take me on a journey. I didn't know how he was going to do it, but I knew that he was going to take me on a journey, and I was going to serve him all the days of my life. And that was 37 years ago.
It's interesting, always interesting how that happens.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a break in action for a second and talk about myself concerning that particular journey with God. I remember when, after my wife passed away in 2016, I had gone through so many things. And about 2 weeks later, I was just like I was close to the edge myself.
Mm-hmm.
And, I got on my knees and I said, God, somehow, help me out.
Mm-hmm.
And that those things happen. Things
Yeah.
work to my advantage. I was able to learn some different things, but it always the point I was making, Bambi, God is there. There's always a blessing in the broken pieces. And when you call out to him and you ask for his help, he'll be there. You know,
Absolutely.
that's that's my belief on the situation. So, again, back back to it being the Bambi story we're on. Let me ask you, talk a little bit about the award, the the Journey of Josephine won from Bookfest.
Yes, it was my very first book. I every year I would go to a beach or I would go to water and I would ask God, when is it time for me to write my story? And finally, in 2022, on my birthday, it was my moment to write my story. It took me 3.5 weeks to write my story because I had been writing it for 50 some years. Every
Right.
night I would write some and then I would call a friend and we would I would read it to her and just to see how it went. And then you know it took 3.5 weeks. I found an editor. And then I decided, what's it going to hurt to enter a writing contest? I have never written before. I had a seventh grade teacher that said that she believed in my writing when I was a kid, but I didn't know what that meant because I didn't know what positive influence was. I didn't know what, speaking into somebody's life was like. I didn't know any of that. But I remember her, when my book came, and it was in my hands. And so my daughter, told me, Mom, I think you should just enter a contest, just enter a writing contest and see how it goes. So I entered the writing contest and I won first. I won a gold medal in my book cover, and my daughter created my book cover for me. And I won gold on that. And then I won silver actually on my writing. So for my very first book, for my very first time, for everything, to win a silver, that somebody actually was captivated by my writing, meant more to me than, anything. It didn't stamp me, but then I remembered my seventh grade teacher that said, someday, you are going to honor our school, by becoming an author, and you're a good author. So that's how it happened.
Okay, okay. You know, it's interesting because that is how things happen. You go
Yes.
back and you think you're like, wow, I was told that I was this type of person. I didn't remember
Yes.
that I was this, and it jogged something. Now, Bambi, let's let's get to the question that we were talking about before. Look,
Let's get
the
let's get to my
name.
signature question that everybody asks
Seriously.
me. Every podcast that I have been on say, "Hey, can I ask you?" So I think that's going to be something that's going to be um, my signature thing when I'm on podcast. Let's talk about your name.
I mean,
But
come on. You've
yeah,
got the
I mean,
most
I get it.
iconic name.
Yeah, I totally get it. And, it's an amazing story how God took me on a journey, through my story, through my name. When I was a little girl, I didn't like my name. I was told the story that when I was born, that my dad came into the room and said, "Let me see my son." And my mom said, "No, you don't have a son, you have a daughter." And I was told that he said, "Well, I don't want her." And my eyes opened, and I have very big, deer eyes. And my mom had told me that for some reason she knew that I was going to have a tough life, but she wanted to give me a name that everybody would never have to say Bambi who. Because once you hear Bambi, you kind of like go, "Oh yeah, I know that person." Because there's not a lot of us in this world. Since
Right.
1960, there's only 6,842 of us that have our legal names as Bambi. So,
Okay.
but that journey of my name, took me, it was very difficult. I was bullied as a kid. People didn't date me. People had, wrong ideas of who I was. And when you accept a name that people that people stamp you. Sometimes we accept what the world says our name is. And, and my name is an exotic dancer name. I mean, let's just be honest. It's, it's a name
Right.
that people like go, oh, where you're dancing tonight. Oh, what do you do? And things like that. So I kind of in my mind and in my subconscious, I didn't do that, but I took on what everybody else said my name was. I took on that identity until I was about 32 years old. I was going to decide to change my name to Janet. And I went to the courts, found out it was like $800 to change your name. And so I went to the beach and I sat at the beach one day and I got mad at God. I talked to him and I said, you knew me from the foundations of time. You called me by name. My mother didn't call me by name. You did. And my mother just spoke it forth. And I told him everything that had happened to me. And I said, my name's not even on a name. Like I can't get a license plate. I can't get a keychain. I can't get anything, my name. I had husbands that didn't call me by name. They never introduced my name and things like that. So I told God that if I went to the bookstore one last time and my name was not inside of a name book, that I was changing my name to Janet. So I left that beach and I went to Barnes and Noble and I sat at the table with all these name books. And then I'm like scared going, oh my goodness, I just gave God an ultimatum. Who do I think I am going to give him an ultimatum? And I opened up my name. My first name is Bambi. My middle name is Lynn. And so I opened up the books and looked at my name, and my name means holy child. So when God takes, it was an aha moment. It was a moment going, okay, God, I'm fine. Thank you. Have a great day. It was a moment that transformed who I thought I was. It was a moment that got rid of all the residue and the crumbs that were thrown at me, at the ground. And I was just picking up everybody's crumbs. It came to a moment of my destiny that God he did call me by name. He did call me holy child. And from the foundations of time, that's how he looked at me. And I began this journey of being able to look at myself the same way, to know that there is beauty in my name, to know that there is a destiny in my name, to know that there is a reason, for my name. And there was a reason that God gave it to me, because he knew that I was going to be able to minister to people, because I already had that check mark, that different kind of thing in my life that I really didn't need to tell them about the trauma of my life. All I needed to do is tell them the story of my name.
Understood. Let me ask you, Bambi, when you do talk to people who have been in situations similar to yours, what kind of advice or suggestions do you give them to help them navigate through their personal journeys?
Well, about a couple months ago, I came back to Buffalo because I wrote a second book, The Treasures of My Heart. So I did a little event, for women that came to my event. And they went through each room, different rooms inside of this mansion that we were in. And so one room was about finding their name, writing it on an index card and decorating it. Another room was frosting heart cookies, because the treasures of your heart. Another room was a treasure box, so they painted treasure boxes. And then another room was them writing a story to themselves. And then one last thing that I did is that I had a girlfriend that actually gave me a cape, like a superhero cape. And so I had a superhero cape at the event, and I had crowns, because, fix your crown because you're the daughter of the king. So what I did is that I took each woman and I put a crown on their head, and I told them who they were in Christ. And then I put the cape around them and I said, you are your first superhero. You survived your life. You don't need another superhero in your life. All you need is yourself. And I put a cape around them, and then I had them stand in front of a mirror, and I took a picture of them and I sent them those pictures, to them. I think the first thing that you need to, I'm reading the Viola Davis, her memoir, and she was in a counseling session, and she was talking, and her counselor said, you have to understand that your 8-year-old self survived for you today. Your 8-year-old self went through all of that and survived it. So you could tell your story today. She didn't survive your story for you to stay a victim in your life. So that like really hit me. And that's my thing. I want women to know that 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 there's a plan for their lives, that the things that happen to them doesn't define them. It defines the person that did those things to them. It doesn't define you. What it does, it just gives you an avenue to be able to reach other people in your life. There was years ago that I was on a stage. I had a dream, I had a vision that I was walking on a stage and I was going to give my testimony and going to talk to the audience. And when I looked out to the audience, the whole audience looked like homeless people. They were ragged. They looked like they hadn't taken a shower. And they had words written across to them: shamed, unloved, unwanted, and all these. And I started telling my story. I started telling my story of the things that I had gone through in my life and how those things transform me. And as I'm telling them my story and telling them that I am not the same person I was, but I'm continuing to becoming, their whole countenance changed. They started looking clean. It looked like they'd taken showers. They had changed their clothes. And there were new words that were written over their chest that said loved, beloved, forgiven, set free. And that's what our stories are meant for. My story is not meant for me to stay that little victim, that little girl that had gone through trauma. That I was not meant to stay in that part where my grandfather molested me, my uncle sexually assaulted me, my dad didn't love me. Men, I was married to a man that I was a victim of domestic violence. I was married to somebody that had infidelity continually on me. There were things in my life, but those things don't define me. What defines me is what can come out of that. But if you can't dig yourself out of the hole, it's not the falling that matters. It's the getting back up. Just recently I decided to go on a mechanical bull. Thought, okay, you know what? I'm 55. Who cares? I'm going to go on this mechanical bull. I can do it. And my son-in-law was there and he, and I needed to show him up a little bit, So I went on this mechanical bull and I fell. Like, my daughter started taping she started taping and it was 11 seconds that she taped and I was up there, down there and fallen to the ground. So the guy said to me, just get back up. And so I'm getting back up and I'm thinking, you know what? That's what God says. He says the same thing. It doesn't matter if you fall because we're all going to fall. It matters to get back up. And so I got back up and I stayed 15, I was on there now for 15 from start to finish to 15 seconds.
Wow.
That's what it's all about. It's all about all of us have mechanical bulls in our lives. All of us have a roller coaster in our lives. All of us have dirt in our lives. All of us have gone through things in our lives that we are ashamed of, that we wish you didn't go through, but it doesn't matter. It's the getting back up. And that's what Jesus looks at. And that's what God looks at. And that's what that cape represents, that you are your own superhero.
And the fact that you've taken it to the level of understanding that you can get knocked down, you can fall.
Mm-hmm.
The old saying, fall 7 times, get up 8. It's interesting because there are so many people out here now that don't understand that part of rising is the fall.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You gotta fall in order to come up. It's like the old adage about the fiery phoenix rising up from the ashes type of thing.
Yes.
You have to believe that although you're down, you are not out.
Absolutely.
Allow me to ask, at what point in your life did you really make that decision to say, you know what? I'm going to use what I've gone through to help other people.
I think it's always been something that's been burning within my heart. I just always knew that I was a speaker. I always knew that I was somebody that could tell could tell stories, to bring life, into people's life. But I think that I would probably say when I more so when I reached my 40s. You know, for some reason, 40s is your promised land. You know, it's kind of like the Israelites were in, you know, we're in the wilderness for 40 years. And then they walk in to the land of milk and honey. And they walk in, you know, to now seeing, no longer having to live those 40 years of bondage and of, you know, unfaithfulness, of, you know, mistrust. They, you know, now they're in the promised land. So I think that something happened to me when I turned 40. I started becoming, and I think that I do think for women, it takes us until like 40, 50 years old to realize that old things are passed away and all things become new, and something happens and something ignites within us, that we start learning and start developing ourselves, and we start realizing who we are. We start getting rid of the old things that we don't want in our own lives, and we start developing new ways of looking at life. You know, my life was really hard, but I happened to have been somebody that just kept getting back up. I needed 24 hours, to scream, to yell. And I've been very, very blessed with friends that have said, you know what, Bambi, you got 10 minutes to scream, yell, do whatever you need to do. But then after that 10 minutes, we're going to tell you the truth, and we're going to feed you the truth, and we're going to help you to heal. So I think first, the group of friends that you surround yourself with. I was not somebody that wanted to be friends with everybody. I could be acquaintances with people, but I strategically picked my friends that would call me up higher, that wouldn't allow me to stay down, but that would want me to be a better person. And so that really helps. So I would say, like, in my 40s, and now I'm in my 50s, and now I'm like hungry to do something different. Now I'm hungry, to tell my story. I'm hungry for healing into women's lives. I'm hungry to see women to be set free, and to lock arms with each other. It's like it's a burning desire within me, to be that person that changes one life at a time. I want to be that person that allows women to tell their stories, but yet I'm there to hug them and to hold them, but not keep them there. I think that it's really difficult because we live in a society now that society is allowing people to stay in their trauma. We're medicating trauma. We're not dealing with trauma. But the best thing that you can do is to deal with the trauma, to deal with the lies that the trauma caused you. Because when you've had trauma since you were a little kid, it defines who you are, and it gives you a story that isn't true. My son just recently had told me, Mom, you lived your life thinking that you needed all the breadcrumbs of people's lives when you belonged at the banqueting table. You belong sitting at the table. And I want my story to be a story that I can tell so that women and men know that those crumbs under the table, they don't belong to you. You belong sitting at the table. So don't grab those crumbs anymore. Leave them.
And go in, grab the whole piece of bread.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you something. You said something earlier, which was interesting. You were talking about how you work with women to help through the healing process. Now, I've seen your website, Healing Through Stories, and it's interesting because it's clearly geared to helping women to be able to tell their story.
Yes,
It
absolutely.
seems like there's a constant extension of it that allows women to do so. How receptive are people to that, and to that particular avenue? And do you get a lot of people that will tell their story?
I do get people that will tell their story to me personally, because I worked in an industry that I was in people's homes all day long. For the last 17 years of my life, I worked for the Census Bureau, and I worked for Nielsen TV ratings and computer research, which brought me into people's homes every day. People want to talk about themselves. People want the invitation for the beginning sentence to start. So for me, it's my responsibility to say, hey, tell me your story. it's my responsibility to start the conversation, because a lot of people want to tell their story, but they're scared, because we have these preconceived ideas about how people are, where people live, what people do, what their jobs are. We carry all these preconceived ideas. So it's my responsibility, just like you as a podcaster, having your own podcast, it's your responsibility to draw the story out of them, because people do want to tell their story. They want to be set free, but they don't know how. So that was the beginning of my life. I now have just recently lost my job with Nielsen, but I believe that it wasn't necessarily that I lost my job. It was that God needed another open door for me. He needed me to be able to walk into another open door. I know that there's a calling on my life. I know that there's a burning desire within my heart to give people the opportunity to tell their stories. The stories on my podcast, on my website, I do allow women to write. If somebody wants to write a story, if they want to write it anonymously, because we all have a story and we all have somebody else that has walked through the same thing that we are. We just got to be willing to be brave enough. And then, you know what? And this whole statement is really true, is I put my pants on the same way that you do. And when you begin to hear people's stories, you begin to realize it's true. There's no other way that you can put your pants on besides one leg and then another. So we shouldn't be offended by each other's stories. We should be open, to hear people's stories, because stories transform you. Somebody else's story will heal you. It will make you feel like you're not the only one that it ever walked through. It was a healing time to know that I wasn't the only person. When I wrote my story, and I wrote the Journey of Josephine, and I had my first launch party, and some of the kids that some of the women that I grew up with that bullied me in high school, they actually came, to my launch party, asking me for forgiveness for how they bullied me. But I thought I lived in a snow globe. I thought that everybody around me knew nothing about what was going on, and I was the only one that was going through the things that I was going through as a kid. And when I wrote my story, I realized people would whisper in my ear, "That happened to me too. Yeah, my uncle did this to me too. My grandfather did this to me too. My husband did this to me too." They started whispering in my ear and hugging me as to say, "Thank you for giving me a voice." And that's what we're called to do.
That is amazing, because you do, like you said, you feel like you do live in a snow globe, like you are the only person,
Yeah.
until you find out there's so many others
Yeah.
have gone through some type of cycle.
Yep.
Bambi, allow me to ask you this: how can people get in touch with you if they want to be able to go onto your website and write some stories or anything of that nature?
Yeah, they definitely can go, they definitely can subscribe to my website, healingthroughstories.com. It is all one word. And every week I do write a blog. If anybody ever wanted to write a story and even wanted to be anonymous, they can also email me, josephine.rstory at gmail.com. Sorry, not Yahoo. But it is josephine.rstory at gmail.com. I also do sell my books, on my website. You can get them also from Amazon. And I am on Facebook. You can look me up on, my name is Bambi Lynn on Facebook. And there's those avenues that if you wanted to get a hold of me. I am also looking for speaking engagements, and I'm looking for, other podcasts for me to be able to share my story. And, if there's an avenue for, your listeners, that if they know anybody that knows anybody, to be able to start, that I'm able to go out and share my story and to share, what has happened in my life and how I am my own superhero within my own life. So.
Okay. Bambi, I want to just say this. It's been amazing to hear you talk and to see that you've taken your challenges. And not only have you been able to put them in to your writing, which is incredible, but also to be able to help you to use it to help others be
Absolutely.
able to share their story. So
Absolutely.
I absolutely congratulate you, and I thank you so much for being able to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Bambi Lynn,
Thank you.
incredible, incredible person. Go to her website, healingthroughstories.com. Ladies, if you find that you want to be able to get yourself out there, to identify your story, things of that nature, she offers a service through her website that'll allow people to be able to write. You can even write anonymously.
Yes, absolutely.
So that is great. Again, Miss Bambi Lynn, Bambi, it was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. God bless you.